What changes did Disney make for the live-action remake of Lilo and Stitch from the original cartoon? Let's talk about that. So let me start by saying I'm going to start out with stuff that is just general changes and doesn't really spoil too much of the plot, assuming you've seen the first movie and you have some idea how the story goes. And then later on, I'll let you know when I'm going to start doing the major spoilers. I'm going to only cover the most plot-affecting changes that I think happened, although there were obviously some changes like with the dialogue. Obviously the whole style was different, so just keep that in mind. These are just like what I thought were sort of the biggest, most plot-changing changes. So let's start out with characters. So first of all, Captain Gantu. In the animation, Captain Gantu is the one who loses Stitch as he's trying to transport him to exile, and then he becomes an antagonist at the end of the movie. So in the live-action remake, they just take out Captain Gantu. I understand this choice because he was basically a giant shark, and I could see why kids would maybe be afraid of seeing a realistic-looking giant shark. That would probably be a little bit scary and would maybe not make for a great family-friendly film. So I get why they decided to change that, but I think they probably could have kept the Captain Gantu character and just reimagined what he would look like instead of taking out his character entirely. There are also two new characters, and those are the neighbor, who is David's mom, or at least appears to be David's mom. She considers herself to be Ohana with Nani and Lilo. And then the other new character is the social worker. In the original cartoon, Cobra Bubbles is the social worker, and he's a former CIA agent. That character is still in the movie, but he is not the social worker. Again, I kind of understand why they did this, because it was a little bit implausible that this former CIA agent would now be a social worker, and that he would just happen to get assigned to Lilo and Nani so that he's there for the important parts of the story. So I kind of understand why they made that choice, but it is pretty plot-changing. Along with those same ideas about character changes, we also get some changes to Nani's character, which I thought overall weakened the sister bond between Lilo and Nani. Nani just doesn't seem to be as present and involved with Lilo. Obviously she's busy and her parents just died, and we know that, and that was true in the animated cartoon as well. But she just seems to not prioritize Lilo as much as the character in the movie did, and doesn't seem to feel the same strong affection and bond with Lilo. So for example, she doesn't take Lilo to go adopt Stitch, and she also doesn't make it to Lilo's hula recital. Just doesn't feel like she's trying as hard to be as good of a sort of parental figure to Lilo, and she's just sort of more focused on making sure that she's able to financially care for Lilo, which is obviously also super important, but it just kind of took away from their bond. Number 3 is the changes to David's character. So in the original cartoon, David is sort of Nani's love interest, but he's also just a friend, and he is really there for Nani and Lilo. In the new movie, he doesn't really have that same role. So he's kind of their neighbor. He's just not as helpful. He's very awkward. He was awkward in the cartoon, but it's worse. It's much worse. He's just not as strong of a character as he was. So he had good ideas, and he was trying to help Lilo and Nani. And in this movie, you could have taken his character out entirely and it wouldn't have changed the movie at all. Disney has been doing this thing where they diminish male characters and make their characters worse. I don't think that it's good, and I don't like it, and I hope that they stop. I think they should be demonstrating what a good man looks like, and it's not necessarily these weak and unimportant men who don't add anything to their lives. Number 4 is that Lilo doesn't adopt Stitch. I think this is huge because in the original movie that ended up being really important again at the end, but also is something that Nani and Lilo do together. Nani hears Lilo wishing for a friend, and because she's struggling to make friends with people her age, she decides it'd be a good idea to get her a dog. So this is a case of Nani seeing something that's missing for Lilo and actively trying to help, and that just strengthens their sister bond. Okay guys, this is where the spoilers really start to come in. So this is gonna kind of give information about how the movie ends that is different from the animated cartoon. If you don't want to have that spoiled for you, this is the point where you should stop watching. You can come back after you've seen it. Okay, so I'm assuming that everyone who is still watching wants to know how the movie ends, or is okay with knowing some of the things that happen at the end. So number 5 is that Jamba is the antagonist. Now, in the original cartoon, Jamba and Fleekley were sent back to retrieve Stitch, and that is still the case. In this version, Jamba volunteers to go and retrieve Stitch. So the Grand Councilwoman doesn't try to convince him to go, he volunteers as a way to get out of having to go to prison. And so he and Bleakley are sent to Earth. They do have to try to not interfere with the humans or let them know about them, just like in the original cartoon. So that's the same. However, in the original cartoon, towards the end of the movie, the Grand Councilwoman decides that they've failed their mission and sends Captain Gantu to retrieve Stitch. And he becomes the new antagonist because Jamba ends up having a change of heart when he talks to Stitch and ends up becoming sort of a fun uncle figure to Lilo once the movie ends. However, in this one, they don't have Captain Gantu, so they just have Jamba continue to be the bad guy. He recaptures Stitch, and then he has this sort of tirade about how Stitch's problem is that he has the capacity to love, and he's gonna create him to be even more evil, and then he's gonna use him against the Galactic Council, and that's his whole villain plan. And it's just, it takes away from Jamba. Also, Jamba has no character arc. He just stays the same the whole time. So I felt like that kind of took away from it. But also, if you recall from the original cartoon, when they show the post-credit stuff, Jamba ends up making Lilo like a little hovercraft that she can ride around in. So not having him become that fun uncle is gonna ultimately take away from her like happily ever after. And I think that's kind of sad. Number 6 is the change to Cobra Bubbles. So I already mentioned that he's not the social worker, and that's fine. He is a CIA agent, and he found out about Stitch and the other aliens who are now on Earth. His job is to find out what's going on and report that back to the government. He does successfully sort of track down Stitch and figures out he's at Lilo and Nani's house, so he poses as a social worker director so that he can get in with Nani and Lilo and find out what's going on with Stitch. He ultimately doesn't have much of a relationship with the family, so when they need him after Stitch and Lilo have both been taken, he doesn't really have a reason to try to go after them, and they really have to do some convincing to get him to help. He also doesn't have a previous relationship with the aliens, which was huge in the first movie. So the first movie, he had met the Grand Councilwoman before. They knew and trusted each other because they'd worked together, and he was the one who had saved the planet by claiming that mosquitoes were an endangered species. So he had this trust already with the aliens. He no longer has that, so there's actually this awkward part at the end where when the Grand Councilwoman says, well, how are we gonna keep the planet from finding out about Stitch and about aliens? He's like, you have my word. And she just kind of looks like, should I trust this guy? I don't know him. And she does ultimately decide to do it. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, but there's not really a reason. And I didn't like that. It took away from the plot significantly, in my opinion. Now, on that note, number 7 is the ending. If you really don't want the ending spoiled, please stop watching at this point. I'm gonna tell you how the movie ends. It's the same basic ending initially as the original cartoon movie. So the Grand Councilwoman comes to Earth, captures Stitch, and he needs to say goodbye to his family, and the Grand Councilwoman realizes that he's sort of been redeemed and has this newfound family, and there is good in it. She does decide to let him spend his exile on Earth, and Bleakley is going to be the one who's sort of overseeing them. So that all is sort of the same. Now, as you recall in the original cartoon, they also had oversight from Cobra Bubbles, who was already their social worker, and now they had resources from Jamba and Bleakley being there, and they even helped rebuild the house and everything. In this one, that stuff sort of still happens. However, the big change, the social worker still wants Nani to not be raising Lilo. And Lilo also says to Nani, I think you should pursue your original dream of being a marine biologist by going to college. Now, the reason this is important is because throughout the whole movie, they've also been talking about Nani going to college and how she stopped going to college when her parents died and she had to take care of Lilo. I think it'd actually be really hard to go back to college after such a major life event like that, and I think you'd need a while before you were ready to really get back into that. So the social worker and the neighbors come up with this plan that now Lilo is going to live with the neighbor who already considers her Ohana, and Nani is going to go off to college. Of course, this is presented as a happy ending, even though Nani and Lilo are going to be separated because they can still visit, and this way Nani is getting to live out her dreams. But I realized that the thing that I didn't like about this was that it, one, takes away Nani's sacrifice to raise Lilo. It takes away their sister bond and their love. And it also has a strong implication in its message that you cannot be fulfilled by raising a child, and you can only be fulfilled as a woman by pursuing your education and career. I might be reading into this too much, but as a mom who is just a mom and does not have a separate career, I gave up my career to be a mom, I found this kind of offensive. The implication that you can only be fulfilled as a woman by having the specific career that you want and not by raising a child and just doing what needs to be done in order to take care of that child because you love them, that just feels kind of callous and shallow. Like they didn't think about the fact that that's not the only way to be fulfilled. So I really disliked that aspect of it, and I wish they hadn't done it. I think Disney should have just stuck with the original script from the original movie, and they would have had a better movie. So those were my thoughts about the movie. So did I like the movie overall? Yes, I liked it. I thought it was really cute. Lilo and Stitch were obviously my favorite parts. My daughter really liked Stitch as well. I wish they had kept the ending the same from before, and I wish that they hadn't changed David. But other than that, I really thought it was a pretty cute movie, and I'd say go ahead and go see it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if this is the kind of video you like to see, and look out for a Mission Impossible movie review coming soon.